Hi everybody! Welcome back to Dark Souls 2. Now that we're done screwing around with PvP stuff, let's actually move on with the game. Before we set out for the next area, let's head back to Majula and do some maintenance. First of all, let's burn this sublime bone dust we got from the Purgatory. I didn't want to do it last video because I know not everybody wants to watch a bonus video. With that out of the way, let's go talk to Rosabeth of Melfia, not Melfia of Rosabeth, and upgrade our pyromancy flame just a little bit. We found a fire seed with that bone dust, so.
I'm always here, so come and see.
No trip to Majula would be complete without visiting Lenigrast. Make sure everything is in working order. I'm actually going to use the Great Scythe for a little bit. Since we're going to Harvest Valley, I figure it's appropriate. We'll talk a little bit more about the ins and outs of the Great Scythe later. For now, I'm pondering putting a chunk into the spear, but I decide against it because chunks are still pretty precious at this point in the game. Now, if we're really going to go all in on this Great Scythe thing, I think we need to change our outfit a little bit. First of all, the Grim Reaper needs a spooky hood, spooky flowing robes, and nobody cares about the pants or the gloves. Much better. The Great Scythe has an interesting attack pattern. Oh, the Grim Reaper also needs spooky bells to announce his presence. It has quite a bit of reach. However, like halberds, it has a bit of a blind spot if you're too close. You'll do much less damage if you just hit them with the stick part. Now, our final preparation before going to Harvest Valley is to go visit Licia of Lindeld again. She has a useful miracle that I would like to purchase before we head out.
Just speak up if you're... That's why I'm here.
We want Caressing Prayer. This removes poison buildup.
The power of miracles be with you.
It requires 15 faith to use, and we're at 14, so let's just go put a point in there real quick and be on our way. Now, I would not recommend getting this miracle if you are not investing in faith at all, because then the investment in this is way too much. But if you're already sort of going on the path down faith, or investing in enough intelligence and faith for various utility spells, then I definitely recommend picking up Caressing Prayer for this next area, and a couple other ones. Overall, the 8,000 souls we spent on this will probably be recouped in no time, because poison mosses are pretty expensive. You get a pretty generous 8 uses for each bonfire rest for Caressing Prayer, so you can go pretty far afield with poison and not have to worry too much. I hate that gunk. Our eventual destination is this rather impressive looking structure in the background. Now, Harvest Valley proper is a very gray and lifeless area with the only real color coming from icky poison goo. and icky poison gas. There's also a couple of leftover skeletons from the cops, but we won't be seeing too many of them. Now, as you might expect, wandering around this gas will gradually make your poison meter build up. And if you stay in it too long, you get poisoned. Poison is a very nasty status effect, and it drains your health really quickly, so make sure that you're on top of it. Now, this large-looking guy in the fog is a dark magic giant. They are not especially threatening enemies. They move slowly, and their attacks are very highly telegraphed. However, if you get hit by one of those dark magic orbs, there's a good chance you're just going to die outright, so be very careful when engaging these guys. They do tend to get thwarted pretty handily by elevation differences, however. They can also smack you, but that's not really a problem. It doesn't do very much damage. As you might suspect, since they're just sort of standing around in poison all the time, poisoning them is not a valid option of dealing with them, if that's something that you're into. You'll have to figure out something else. Dark magic is also fairly ineffective. Now, naturally, there's a bunch of goodies scattered around in this poison pit. Due to the cast time of Caressing Prayer, if you're using that to purge the poison, you're going to want to start casting it a little bit before the meter fills up completely. That way you take very little or no chip damage from the poison. The Great Scythe is pretty powerful if you hit the sweet spot. It's sort of an equivalent, like a dexterity-based greatsword almost. It's a little bit different though. It's sort of like a cross between that and a halberd. Oh, it's Gavlan. Hi, Gavlan.
Gavlan knew.
Speaking of poison, we are ever so slightly poor at the moment, so I'm just going to buy a single throwing knife and leave.
Many deal, many thanks.
I guess this must be where he goes to coat all of his wares in poison. He certainly doesn't seem to mind. Actually, I think I forgot something back in there. Though it might seem counterintuitive to leap into more poison muck, there's actually a chest down here. Our reward is another fire seed and a divine blessing. After you pass a certain point, the game is pretty darn generous with fire seeds. Now, we're running low on Caressing Prayers, so I'm actually going to wait a little bit for this to tick down a little before I make the mad dash and get stopped by a rock. That's why I waited. Sometimes you get stopped by rocks. Now, this is a pretty difficult encounter. There are 2 dark magic giants over there, and not a lot of room to maneuver. Now, they do have a bit of a weakness here. You don't actually have to go down to their level to hit them if you have a weapon with enough reach. Most of the time. Now, there's a good reason to fear these guys. that Dark Orb just completely cleaned our clocks. We have enough effigies that I'm comfortable humaning up whenever we get a little bit low on max health. I don't want to have to resort to using the Ring of Binding just yet. Now, you don't actually have to use Caressing Prayer or Poison Moss when you're poisoned. You can use it preemptively to simply cleanse your bar. The dark magic giants will not follow you, but skeletons will, so we should probably take care of him. Alright, lesson learned. Before we take on the magic giants, we should probably clear out the area of the little guys so we don't get distracted. The backstab animation for the scythe is a little weird. It doesn't really look like we're actually hitting him with the sharp part since we're so close, but I mean, I guess if you get hit in the back of the head with a wood stick, that still hurts. Now with those guys out of the way, let's try and deal with this guy again. Aggroing both of them would be bad news, so I'm content to take it slow and steady. However, taking it slow and steady sometimes means you die. If you're bad. Like me. I'm bad. Sometimes in this game, you just get stuck on the stupidest little things. Like, in any other circumstance, that encounter would not be a big deal for somebody with my experience of the game, but just, I guess, you know, when you get to recording and you're aware that you're sort of on the clock, you get hit by little mental blocks, and then you have a 40-minute video about the Executioner's Chariot. Alright, once more with gusto. Now, I'm very wary of wasting more time with this guy, so I'm taking this incredibly carefully. However, we get a little bit lucky, and we sort of lock him into this upward slap that he does, which is not really anything. You can tell which attack he's going to do by the sound that the guy riding him makes. If he makes a little noise before he attacks, that means that he's going to do the Dark Orb, and you'd better get the fuck out of the way. Here we are sort of bearing witness to one of the weaknesses of the Great Scythe. It's not very good in close quarters. Not just because it has a blind spot, and not just because we're floating in midair, but also because it tends to bounce off the walls pretty erratically. A weapon like this takes some room to use effectively. So, if you do want to use the Great Scythe, which I honestly recommend, it's a pretty good and versatile weapon. It also doesn't take a lot of stats to use. Then just keep in mind that you might want to have a shorter range backup on hand for when things get a little more close quarters. Now, the fight with this last giant is much easier because we have much more room to maneuver. We don't necessarily have to confine ourselves to the upper ledge to avoid aggroing another one. That said, there's no reason to get complacent. Seemed like that should have been a backstab. Another thing to note about the Great Scythe is that it causes a lot of poise damage. For such a relatively light weapon, that's a pretty big deal. This bonfire here is a much welcome respite, and I decide to test out one of the new pyromances that we got from Tichy Gren. Fire Whip is very powerful if you can channel the whole thing. However, as we will see later, it does have its downsides. The first order of business in this next area is to explore. However, the places to explore are filled with icky gas, so I'm actually going to go back to the bonfire and light a torch, because when the only thing you can see is the gas, it's actually really easy to get lost down there and sort of succumb to poison as you try to find the ladder back up. The torch offers some contrast in the walls, so you can actually see where you're going for the most part. If we take this tunnel, we come to this chest, which is filled with various poison-related goods. There's a lot of poison in this area, if you weren't paying attention. Now, just a reminder, the torch does not tick down if you have it equipped on a ladder. So if you just want to take a minute to collect yourself while you have your torch out, just hop on a ladder. That way leads to our destination, but we're not quite ready to go just yet. This hole in the ground looks much more enticing. There's a goodie down there. Ah, what a lovely goodie it is. Now, the Simpleton Spice is a much more valuable prize. That is not the only way to get that Simpleton Spice. You can actually sort of jump to it from the other side, but that's probably the easiest way of getting it. Since we dealt with literally no enemies in that little journey, I figured that just resting at the bonfire again to clear the poison would not be entirely a bad idea. Alright, so this area is really irritating. It offers an alternate route to the poison chest, but it also plays host to an annoying gimmick. This dark magic giant can break through these planked walls, and we cannot. Therefore, it is now the unenviable task of ours to maneuver this giant into such a position that he will use his giant hands to smack open the wall in the back, where we can see items. Now, getting him back there is a real pain in the butt. I think that the best way that I have found over my many playthroughs of this area is to sort of attack him a little bit, and then wait for him to sort of back up and continue, but sometimes he just gets into a pattern of continuing to throw dark balls at you, so it just takes patience and a bit of trial and error. A lot of patience. Come on, buddy. Come on, over here. Now, regrettably, the dark balls themselves will not knock open the door. despite the fact that they hurt way more than his hands. So you actually have to get him into the physical vicinity of that wall. Now, the little choke point that the walls create here makes this a lot more difficult than it already is. As you can see, it's very difficult to maneuver around him to sort of get him to go to the right place if he's in that little area. Once it opens up and he's in this alcove, it becomes a bit easier. Alright, getting close. Getting close. Come on. Come on, big guy. Wrong wall. There we go. Okay. I'm more than happy to take that hit. This guy has more than outlived his usefulness, so let's get rid of him. There's some fairly nice loot back here. Not really anything that's worth all the hassle, but if you're determined to get most things in this game, then there are probably harder and more worthless items to get. Alright, time for something that is actually a test of skill instead of patience. Though, by all means, it still involves patience. This passageway leads to a very unpleasant arena with 4 artificial undead in it. Taking out all of these guys is very difficult. If you don't know the best strategy, this can be a huge roadblock. And unfortunately, the best strategy is sort of boring. Basically, what you need to do here is lure all of the big guys down into the pit, and then immediately run up the ramp up here. That way you sort of cordon them off. And they can only attack you one at a time. Now, as you can see, Fire Whip is extremely powerful if you are able to sort of correctly judge the distance of where the enemy is and where Fire Whip is. It can be difficult from the usual behind-the-back camera angle. It takes some practice to really get the most out of that spell. Now, the strategy that I use to clear this room is usually pretty effective, but sometimes they just sort of camp the ramp, and you just have to waste time and run around and hope they leave. There we go. As you might expect, this battle becomes much easier when you finally eliminate one of them. However, due to the way that you sort of have to line them up here, it's difficult to actually focus on one and eliminate them from the pack. You just sort of have to take it on faith that the one coming up after you is the one that needs to die. Fighting them in the open with all of them swinging their enormous scythes at you is just... that is not going to end well for you. Believe me, I've tried it. If the artificial undead were easier to stagger, they had less poise, or were just generally less tough all around, then it would be a much more manageable fight, but quite frankly, the way they are now, taking on 4 of them at once is just not tenable. Not without very specific strategies, weapons, and spells. Now, don't get impatient. We've made a lot of headway here, but if we get hasty and we attack one too many times when it isn't safe, even 2 of these guys at once can completely wreck our day. Now, fortunately, we are at the point where we can basically just fight these guys normally now. With 2 of them, it's easy enough to get them to sync up their attacks as such that we can counterattack safely. And when there's 1 of them, these guys aren't a threat at all, because they're very slow and predictable. That's all of them. Not an easy fight by any stretch of the imagination, certainly not a short one. Now, fortunately, we do not need the help of a giant to break open these boards, so we are now free to loot the place. There's some pretty nice stuff hidden up here. And sometimes there's nothing. Large Titanite shards in particular are quite valuable at the moment. We have plenty of small shards and a fairly reasonable supply of chunks, but large shards are proving to be pretty rare. And given that you need them to progress to chunks in the first place, a reasonable supply of chunks will not actually do you much good if you don't have large shards. That way is the way out. We get some more spices, which are always welcome. We're almost to the point where we can use those. If you get the foolish idea of retreating from this area, then don't bother. We will once again be thwarted by chest-high rocks. There's a crystal lizard up here, and this time I'm prepared. I'm leaving. I'm leaving. I hate this place. I hate crystal lizards. I hate the Great Scythe. I hate enhanced undead. I hate artificial undead. I'm going back to the bonfire. Now, the real reason to do this area is that fragrant branch of yore. A valuable item, to be sure, and one we'll get some use out of later. For now, however, let's take a break, reflect on our failures, and I'll talk to you guys next time.